In 2018, Insomniac Games developed Spider-Man for the Sony PlayStation 4, which was released to positive reviews and portrayals for the characters depicted in the game. It was very important to remember that this game was essentially the first of Spider-Man, with the character being in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Prior to that, Spider-Man related games were not made with that pivotal factor that would be reinforced in later development of games or Spider-Man related media. The character Peter Parker was supposed to be relatable to anyone who read Spider-Man comics in the 1960s, and the archetype of such a character can be sensitive to the portrayal of Peter Parker in media. So when the game was released, the visual design of Peter Parker was applauded with being relatable to the comics, as well as a fresh new appearance on what Peter might look like with PlayStation 4 graphics and a late 2010s visual pop culture image in mind. Once the game was released, and even later with the related downloadable content, which was the City That Never Sleeps storyline, the details and visual depictions were all automatically accepted, and players of the game as well as comic fans were anticipating what else could be done with these modern portrayals of Peter Parker in video games, even other characters related to Peter Parker. In 2020, with the quote-unquote remake of Spider-Man, which was essentially an add-on of downloadable content featuring Miles Morales from the 2018 storyline, Peter Parker's visual appearance was completely redesigned. The official response from Insomniac Games were due to the features of the PlayStation 5. The game needed some changes and upgrades on developmental decisions were to change the appearance of Peter Parker in the game. Many have questioned the reason for the drastic change in Peter Parker's visual design for the game when it was perfectly fine as it was. Gamer approval for the visual design and comic book reader reactions for the original visual design and comic book reader reactions to the original visual design were both overwhelmingly positive. Insomniac Games knew that the original visual features were fine for the character, but changed it regardless. What's further interesting is that it wasn't just critics and gamers who were surprised at the change with the visual design of the character. Even developers from Insomniac Games were divided on the change with Peter Parker's visual character appearance in-game. Critics discussed the reason for the change in appearance for the character were most likely due to the reasons that Sony, which owned Insomniac Games, as well as sharing the film rights for Spider-Man with Marvel Studios, later decided to redesign the character visually with the Marvel Cinematic Universe actor who portrays Spider-Man, which was Tom Holland, in mind for the secondary visual portrayal of Peter Parker. Consensus is that critics, gamers, and even developmental staff from Insomniac Games overwhelmingly prefer the original visual design for Peter Parker with the Spider-Man 2018 release. And for the 2020 quote-unquote remastering of the game, there was no real need to change it, and it was almost likely a decision from Sony management on making the game more similar in terms of visual appearance for Peter Parker to that of Tom Holland from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Sometimes a character can be forgotten because the portrayal of a character can be as simple or as complex as how they look.